Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Motivation Monday. As we go through this here today, we'll look at some tips for the week, go over some sales shout-outs, and then we'll talk about working into your sales script some storytelling to help increase sales. So let's just jump into it and we'll get things rolling. So for our tip, starting this month, back on the 1st of April, Medicaid started reviewing all persons on their rolls. Because during COVID, one of the things that the federal government did was put that review, that's an annual review, on hold. So from starting back in about 2019, when COVID started there late that year, and for the last couple of years, there have been no reviews. They've just been continuously adding people to Medicaid. People that will be coming off because they just no longer qualify. So it's going to provide a QLE for those who are, under 65, and an SEP for those who are over 65. So whichever side of that markets that you're working, just know that these people will be becoming available, and that's going to be an opportunity for some sales in there. As far as sales last week, in short term, we saw, a lot of the sales were kind of split between the, the Allstate product and the United Health One short-term plans. And so it was pretty much about 50-50 there. Under the limited medical, I saw a lot of HCSC plans and, again, the NHIC plans. The accident was, again, that pretty much a split, probably dependent upon, I didn't look that closely as to whether they purchased a short-term plan from United. They most likely got the accident plan from United. And if they got the short-term plan from Allstate, they probably went with the Allstate plan. We saw this again in critical illness. A little bit different though in the dental. I used to see a lot of emeritus, no longer see any of that at all. It was almost entirely United Health One and the Allstate one. The people doing the selling for short term, Richard Banfield, who was probably 50-50 between United Health One and NHIC, Bill Cox, Rebecca Kiefert, they were all kind of leading the way. Limited medical, we saw Rebecca, really led the way there, followed by Bill. And in accident, it went just the way you would think, because you get that short-term plan, you need that accident plan to cover the deductible, and that's just the way that it went. And so that should be, the hardest thing that I learned when selling these kinds of plans was that I would to try to not make any assumptions over what they can afford and what they would want. Always give them all the options and let them choose what risk that they want to take on themselves or they can't afford to cover. And I always figure if you can't afford to cover it, you definitely can't afford it if it happens to you. Okay, so we're going to talk about storytelling. I mean, this is probably one of the oldest sales methods out there, but you want to be able to create that story and put it into your, don't want to just be reciting facts, figures, premiums, payouts, max out of pockets. This sort of makes that thing a little bit more personal and a more meaningful experience, and you're starting to develop that, rapport with the customer. By telling a story, you'll find that it can really help out with the sales process there. So come on, computer. Okay. So we do need to know a little bit about our buyer to begin with. Pain points, the type of language that they're using. How do they see themselves? Or we get into a lot of that old school stuff, like is it the controller? Is it the person with the passion? What are we dealing with as our customer? And again, what is their role in that decision-making process? So let me. And so if we're going to, incorporate this narrative into the sales presentation, we kind of need to know what that buyer persona is to kind of help understand, help you understand your audience and what they're struggling with. And so these are the key elements to familiarize yourself with in this process. And it's really just looking at some really basic storytelling is we need to know, the character. And when I say the character, what I'm looking at here is how the customer sees themselves, okay? Because in the sales context, your customer, your character is the customer, and depending upon the specific type of story that you're decided to tell, your character has got to see themselves in that role, okay, as you're doing it. And you can, pull something from the past sales, or it can be, an individual. It can be an amalgamation of a number of, generic customers that you've had, or maybe you steal it from somebody else, because you've heard the story. But in any case, the goal of defining your character is to create this compelling hero for the story. And in order to buy into your narrative, your prospective customer needs to be able to see themselves as that main character in the story. We're going to need to have some context, because that's going to provide the framework for the story. So it can be both internal and external context, has to be considered. The internal refers to the setting of the story. You've identified your main character, and now in the internal context, you're trying to explain the story's background and setting, and trying to set that atmosphere, mood, and characteristics. Conflict. You've got to have some kind of a conflict. Think of all the books you've read or movies you've seen, and the ones that you thought were really great. The characters had something in there that captivated your attention and drove that plot forward. So even in the context of a sales presentation, your story will simply fall flat if there isn't some sort of conflict for your main character to overcome. Okay, that's going to be that person that you're trying to sell to. So the perspective of the customer needs to get invested in your character, and they must face, some relatable risk and tangible potential for loss in there. So the creation refers to pulling all of this together, into, the characters, the context, the conflict into one, flowing narrative. If you've ever listened to someone tell a real long-winded story that never seems to get to a point, or one that rushes the narrative in such a way that the impact that you're trying to create is lost, these are failures of creation. Now, if you commit them to your sales presentation, commit them during that, then you've wasted a lot of time and effort. So we want to really construct this story well, so that when you tell it, it will just all make sense. Okay. So here's how we kind of put that together into a customer experience, okay, which is what you're looking to do here. So you've got you got the basics of a good story construction. So you go back to those pain points that we've identified when you were working with your buyer, and try to match them with a success story from past customers who solved a similar problem using your products and services. Okay, so you put these elements together. One that kind of worked for me in the past was I had a thing that had happened at one time, and I was selling a short-term medical plan, an accident, and a critical illness. So the story I always tried to work in was I had a prior customer that called me up because she wanted to cancel her portion of the plan for her because her husband, she wanted even to keep him on it, but cancel her portion. So of course, my immediate response is, okay, I can help you with that. As always, answer that way. And then, you start asking the questions, why just your portion? And so she tells me that her husband had had a heart attack and that he was okay, but he was only 48 years old, but now he's, at home. And the insurance plan just went just the way I'd sold it to him, wound up with only the $250 deductible, and everything else was covered. But the problem that they were facing was that he was going to be out of work for the next couple of months. And so she was trying to save some money. So I asked, wait a moment while I'm looking up the account on the computer. And it went just the way I thought it would, because I always push having that critical illness plan for just this kind of situation. And I asked, is $40,000, would that help out? And of course, I get the affirmative response. I'm telling her, I said, well, I'm going to send this form out to you. And in about 2 weeks, your critical illness plan will be mailing you a check for $40,000. Now, a friend of mine had a similar story that he used, and his was actually even better because it was a personal story of what happened to him. And his story was that his wife had breast cancer, and the critical illness plan that she had was $100,000. So they both took a leave of absence from work, using FMLA. So he was there for support. Money was not an issue, and they wound up going to America Samoa for recovery before returning back to work. And that was his story, and he really sold that. And he spent probably did more critical illness and larger amounts than anybody I knew. And that was all because that was not just a story, but it was his own personal story. And I believe when you can work a personal story in, that's definitely really going to help out a lot better in the world of sales. So if you're going to be using this, you need to begin that right at the very beginning of your presentation, so that you're telling the story right from the beginning. So building the story is only part of the battle, and the way that you create your story will depend upon exactly how you plan to incorporate your final story into your sales presentation. You don't want to just jump into stories and run, sort of infuse them into your presentations in a way that supports the overall narrative that you're trying to create. It's also possible to thread a single story throughout the presentation as a means of maintaining attention, but that's going to be, require a higher level of skill as a storyteller to be able to maintain, clarity and tension through there. Just consider this a narrative device only after you've had a chance to put your stories to the test and see how well they land. You want to pay attention to your delivery as well. Remember, the brain processes visuals 60 times faster than words. When it comes to a sales presentation, storytelling can't just be telling. You need to get some visual in there as well. And that's why it's important to plan for a visual delivery from the start. So whether you're doing it in person or sharing it, remote like we are here via Zoom, make sure you have an effective solution for forging that connection, through some visual clues. Video conferencing can be a powerful tool. And if you aren't able to be in person, with your customer, but it allows you to, create that face-to-face experience that helps drive, the storytelling performance. So you want to be sure and, practice. Just think about things like, I always use the example of a comedian who, can spend years practicing a single story that they're trying to tell, monitoring, audience reaction. Are they sitting back, checking their watches and looking at their phone, or are they leaning forward and engaged in the presentation? Those are the same kinds of things that you want to be doing. So you need to practice the story. You need to test it out, see if it's going to work for you, see if that type of presentation works well. And that's the evaluate. I mean, you may want to change the story, throw it out altogether, or, or modify it some way to make it work for you. Okay? So these are my tips on, trying to incorporate some sort of a story so that you're not just reciting facts and figures, as your presentation is. So I threw in this quote here for today that storytelling is the oldest form of education. And so people, it's been around for a long time and people will really respond well to that. So good luck. Hope you can have some stories, copy other people's if you need to, or you can make your character, like I said, an amalgamation of all the customers you've dealt with in the past and kind of form that character for your story. So good luck with that. It's a very effective tool if you can make it work right. So that's it here for today. Here's any questions. You can always email me at training@ahcpsales.com, or if you have any problems, call agency services at 877-228-8773. That's all I've got for you today. You guys have a wonderful week.